I'm just going to start out a little bit and tell you just a little bit about me. And so I am one of those people that was very fortunate to study at the Houston Galveston Institute in the early 80s. So when I came to the Houston Galveston Institute, we were not doing collaborative work. We were doing brief strategic therapy. And so we combined the Milan work with the Palo Alto. Even though we were always seeing people as people and not a diagnosis, we did kind of have a set of rules that we went by, so that when you first went in and you talked with your client, you were going to form a relationship. And then after you formed the relationship, then you were going to find out what they were doing that was disrupting the feedback loop. So it was more of a communications theory. And so there were a set of more techniques to apply that to the client. And then probably 82, 83, it started changing to a different type of collaboration with people, that it was more of a philosophical stance and a way of doing things. I can remember when I was a very young clinician that we were supposed to positively reframe before we started collaborative practices. And I would always forget that. I would get so involved in a story and I'd be like, oh, I forgot to do the positive reframe, or forgot to do this, to the degree that on my desk, I would have those little yellow Post-its to remind me to do the things that I felt like I was forgetting to do. So when we started doing what we were at first calling narrative work, and we found out that the name was already taken, and so then we called it collaborative language systems. And so it really was a time to develop that, what we call right now, a humanizing relationship. That it's the relationship that we have with people that drives our time with them. And I don't like to use the word sessions. I really like to use words that embody the types of egalitarian relationships that we have with people. So I don't consider people so much as a client, but someone that is suffering. And how can we best help people that are going through very difficult times? And so we continue to do that at the Houston Galveston Institute, and along with people like Tom Anderson and Jaco Sekula and Lynn Hoffman. And then in 2002, I moved to California and I started teaching at a university. And then in 2007, I opened up Now I See a Person Institute. And that the institute was named after a student who said that she hated her client, and that and so we had a conversation about what happens if you hate your client. Well, nobody wants to talk about that, right? And so she said she didn't know, and so we had a conversation about with maybe a small class of students, what happens when you don't like your client. So, well, I think all the time it has to do with you. It has to do with you, how you view them. You know, Tom Anderson used to talk a lot about prejudice. We don't want to. We all come into this field for the same reason, because we want to help people. But it's easy to hold prejudice that they're not doing the right thing. They're not following the treatment plan. They're not, maybe they remind us of our uncle or aunt or our sister, or we don't like their political views. There are so many things to accidentally hold prejudice towards somebody. I remember the student came out the next week and she said, the client that I hated is now my most beloved client. And I was just very thrilled. And so we got that on tape. And she said for the first time in 10 sessions that outside the door, she put the progress note, she put what the psychiatrist had said, the psychologist, the other therapist, the treatment plans of the past, because this person, was considered a chronic, client. And she walked in with an open heart. And for the first time, she saw a person in front of her. And she was so excited because she saw why the therapy wasn't moving. It wasn't moving because this person was unmovable or was so damaged. It was because she was trying to get her to do things that she had either learned or she felt that would be helpful for her. And unfortunately, um, that was chipping away at the relationship. But I think clients are so desperate to have help that that even if the relationship is feeling foreign to them, they will still try to keep that because they want so badly for the suffering to stop. So when I decided to open up the Institute, I started calling it Now I See a Person Institute because I really loved what that woman representative said that day. And so when we first started doing the Institute, we started using horses because I had gotten an email about doing therapy with horses. And I thought, that's a great idea. There is no clinical atmosphere. It's a horse ranch. And these were my personal horses. And so I had raised them like my children. But using the horses was from the first day, I was like, oh my gosh, the relationship that we had with the people that were coming to see us was almost like something that would happen after 6 months. It was so intimate. It was so normal. It was so embracing. And so people started rapidly healing in ways that I had never seen them healing before. A little bit after COVID, we stopped using the horses for a multitude of different reasons. A lot of people were used to being able to be at home or at work when they were talking. And we also found that going into people's homes was huge. So going into people's homes like this, we were able to see people in real live situations where, maybe if there was conflict, we were part of the conflict, or maybe we were helping with the conflict resolution. It was just, it was such an intimate, honored position for us to be in people's homes. But what we learned using the horses humanized ourselves. I hate to say this, but I like all of us, I used to be a little bit proudful, about the way I could do this or the way that I could do that. But when you saw people coming out to the horses and all they had to do is pet the horses and heal, then you knew that what you were doing wasn't that clever, right? A few of us who had studied at the Houston Galveston Institute, we helped open up a clinic. And in that clinic, because we were young and we were passionate and certain, no new people ever saw a psychiatrist. No new people ever went into a hospital. And so it's almost like you had the psychiatrist door that way, and then the rest of the people came in this way. So regardless if they had been hospitalized many times or never, we never used clinical language. We used what we called common talk. And so just like this talk that we're having right now. And so what happened is that people that came in, and usually with these types of clinics, you have people that are considered treatment failures, or just people that you felt that they were so hopeless that it almost didn't matter what you did because they weren't going to be able to transform in any way. So we didn't even give them an adjustment disorder. It was like phase of life issues, parent-child problems, partner relational problems, those types of things. And so no one talked about the word psychosis, the words depression, the words self-harm, the words eating disorder. And I'm not saying that those words didn't occur in the very beginning, because of course a lot of people had been hospitalized. At this clinic, people were referred because they had no insurance anymore. So they had went to other types of facilities over and over and over again and not finding any relief. And so finding that it was almost 100% of the people that came in transformed and no longer had any type of symptoms whatsoever. It was, I wish it could have went on forever. I wish we could have had more noticeability, but we didn't. And at that point in time, I went back to the institute as faculty. What I think as an adult, because then I was in my 20s, you don't get reimbursed the same as if you have schizophrenia.
Yeah.
Major depression. And so we were losing money. And so one day there was a big meeting, and these outside consultants came in and say, "You're losing money." And they said, "We want to put everybody into group therapy." And so people will no longer have individual therapy. So they'll have group therapy and they will have psychiatric services. And so I was like, I don't think that I can do that. And so I think it had all to do with funding because it was so tremendously successful. Even the people that had the chronic label did not go into the hospitals because we would talk with them, we would treat them as people, and we would figure out ways to keep them out of the hospitals. If you, especially myself as a clinician, growing up in a way that hospitalization is not used, that medication is not used, the options are endless, for people to be able to do different things with their lives, for us together to collectively mutually puzzle about these things. And coming up with these options, people do not feel pathology. They don't feel fear. They don't feel that they have something incurable that they're always going to have to fight with for the rest of their lives. My colleague, Pavel, in the Czech Republic, we were doing a conference together, and he was using what he called recovery consultants. And so these were individuals that he had worked with at a prior point in time, and now were working with him. And I was blown away. And I was like, well, we can do that too. One of the things I like that Harry Galushan used to always say, there's no original idea. All the social construction with each other, combining and defining ideas and refining. So we started having people that had lived experiences, or that their family members had lived experiences. And I think that there's a couple of people here that can kind of talk to that a little bit, and how it was for them when they came in after their family member was continuously hospitalized, and it was a very, very hopeless situation.
Are you talking to me?
I am talking to you, you handsome man. Nice to see you.
You too.
Long time no see.
We were in a situation where it just seems like the diagnoses drive everything, because that's how people get paid. and it's not any one person's fault. I mean, I'll be honest, I want a solution when there's a problem. We all do. And if it's a pill, it seems like such an easy, quick solution. But it's a terrible thing, because it's so once there's a diagnosis, it kind of biases everything else. Well, I mean, it's on many levels. My wife and I were having problems, and that us getting through that required a much different approach than initially was attempted. I mean, it meant a lot. It meant the world that someone is showing trust and faith in our ability to solve our own problems. That allows us to actually solve our own problems and work on it. Well, not every problem doesn't get solved, and sometimes it was actually important I remember a lot of times you would just say, I don't have a solution. I don't have a magic solution. I mean, you're so sincere and honest about that all the time. And that's a huge difference. But then at the same time, not giving up and actually continuing to show that you believe in me and believe in us as a family. Um, that means the world.
Mhm.
And when that's broken, which was what happened before, it was just a cascading disaster.
Mhm.
When that there's words that aren't even said, where I was getting a feeling that the person we were working with really didn't think we were worthy of having children on this planet,
Mhm.
and that crushed me inside.
Mhm.
I mean, I know that not to be true, and I won't accept that.
Mhm.
But people have problems, and it's complicated. But showing that kind of lack of faith in us, and usually there's like one person who maybe has a diagnosis of some kind, and then everything is biased against them. I wasn't that would have been a lot worse.
Mhm.
I can't even imagine what that would be like. And my son Simon, one of my sons, he went through a lot because people were telling us that he needed this medication for his own safety,
Mhm.
and I believed them, you know,
Mhm. Mhm.
and that was a huge mistake.
Mhm.
And his brother and his brother Tristan and Simon were both telling me, you know, it these medicines need to stop. They're not helping. They're making things worse. And we even were looking back at old pictures the other day, and you could see you could just see the weight of what these medicines were doing. They definitely weren't helping. And I wish from the beginning we had found other solutions. I'm sure everybody in their own way was trying the best. It's just a matter of their strategy was not going to work because of the most important element, I think, in what you guys do, which is show someone you believe in them. And
Mhm.
and that's probably, and you don't show it directly, you show it in other ways. And
Mhm.
then if someone believes in themselves, they can begin to solve some of their problems, which you're never going to solve all your problems.
Well, maybe you can, but then new problems will come, right?
Yeah,
So you're always on the way, right?
but you're never going to make a problem worse. I mean, I come from I'm a high school teacher, and there's a lot of ways we can create worse problems. And if a student has a positive experience, you're not going to create worse problems. And if you show them you believe in them, no matter what happens, they're not going to create worse problems. But if you give up on them, you're creating an even worse problem because then they're not going to believe in themselves. It's sort of parallel of that.
And it's so almost unbelievable how well-meaning professionals can teach you not to believe in your family, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's pretty well said. And our kids were telling us, Simon was begging us, please get me out of here. And it would break my heart. Because then, even a lot of my dear friends were like, they were talking about, oh, he's a liability, you could lose your house if he does blank. It's just based on fear, really. And we're somehow, it's kind of pervasive that you give kids medicine to fix their behavioral problems. It's sort of pervasive, and it doesn't really work. Kids got to decide they want to behave.
Well, and I think that is also, in my experience, that kids want to do good.
And
Yeah.
so when they're so used to doing bad, they don't think that good is ever possible.
Yeah. It felt, the whole experience felt like it was an uncontrolled experiment on my kid.
Thank you.
I wonder if I could just ask you a couple of questions because I think that you're a wealth of information. So one of the things is that you saw a plethora of psychiatrists, psychologists, marriage and family therapists, and social workers. When a child, hits their parents, they think that he is a danger to others, not just a danger to himself. And so they were thinking about putting him in long-term institutionalization. And we're really pushing for that. And you guys were the hero in that story because you were able to help convince the courts to not do so. Could you?
Okay, there's 2 points to that. One, because I was the victim of his assault, which bruised my face from my forehead to my chin, my voice was invalidated. I kept reminding people that he was on day 3 of weaning off Abilify, that I had been reaching out to the psychiatrists, to the doctors, saying the Abilify is not working. He's being weaned off of it. He's acting really erratic. This doesn't feel right. But because I was the victim, in their words, I was thought of as overprotective and overbearing and trying to remove responsibility from my son. When in fact, I was the closest caretaker who could see that his erratic behavior began when the Abilify was added and that it got worse when it was being removed. Nobody paid attention to that. They attributed his behavior to him being deviant. And it's something I encountered throughout the whole system. The system as a whole doesn't seem to be designed for the social workers, psychiatrists, therapists to take accountability and readjust the routes. And the second point about convincing the judges, well, that was a big smokescreen on my part. I knew I didn't want to send my son away. I knew that he needed to be loved from his family to heal. I never would have, they would just have placed him in 5 states away on a different coast for a year and continued increasing the medication. So I pre-authorized 3 different facilities. And after this attack, DCSF had added a clause in their complaint that my husband and I were now incapable of caring for our son, and that the state would be more capable than us. And I still tear up thinking about that because as a parent who loves their child, who's not abusive or neglectful, I filled out foster care intake forms on Mother's Day because the system as a whole never put the brakes on what was happening to take accountability and revise what had started this. Before he was on the medication, he was just a hyper annoying boy, like he should be. He is smart, he's bored, that was pathologized. And nowhere along the line, to the point of tardive dyskinesia, removing him from our care, placing him in a high security facility for a year.
With but I'm going to stop you with children that were adult teens, that they were, because of, they considered what he did was so high acuity that they didn't place him with peers. They placed him with older teens where he was in a continuous state of anxiety.
Correct, because when a child under 13 attempts suicide, they can no longer be treated in groups of kids under 13. They have to go in the 13 to 18-year-old groups. So for the whole year where he was receiving IOP, PPE, not PP, PHP, he was 12 put in groups of 13 to 18-year-olds, which had issues of sex trafficking and methamphetamine use. He was exposed to so many problematics that were above his age comprehension that should have ever been presented to him. And it added to his anxiety. Do you want me to mention the therapist who diagnosed me and shared it with my husband and not me?
Yes.
Yeah. So my husband and I went to seek a family therapist who was going to work with us individually and as a family. And at meeting number 2, she said, I'm only going to work with the couple, and Carolyn and Simon need to be in therapy, not Donald and Tristan. And I was a bit shaken because it felt like she was saying, you two are the problems, not the other two. Meeting number 4, she requested to be with my husband only. She proceeded to open the DMS or DSM book, and she read a few symptoms. And she asked my husband, does that sound like your wife? And he said, yes. And she turned the book around and there was covert narcissist on top of the book. And she asked him to please never tell me this and never tell our children and never let it leave this room. And that this was going to be something they would keep between her and the intern and my husband as they continued treatment. And so for a year, I went to therapy. And I would leave therapy just telling my husband, like, I feel so unseen. I don't know what's happening. I don't quite understand what's going on because I'm having a sort of things reflected back to me that I'm not connecting with. And over time, this made me feel not seen. I was having reaction and advice given to me that didn't quite fit what I would hear normally or what had been said in the past or how I saw myself. And this led to so many troubles. But the main point being that in hindsight, looking at that year of therapy that was so hard for me, where I don't feel I had much growth, there were times where I'd leave therapy and my husband, my 2 kids would leave in one car and I was in the other car because it seemed like every time we were in therapy, I wasn't allowed to speak as much. My ideas were always sort of rearranged. And there were times where I didn't want to live anymore. And it was the first time in my life that I'd ever felt suicidal. And I now understand that all 3 adults in the room were only looking at me through the lens of that diagnosis that only they knew. So yeah, don't do that to people, please. In front of me and my husband, the therapist apologized to my son for him having such a difficult family. My husband was told that I would probably never get better unless I had really intense live-in therapy for months, if not years. And my children, from attending the therapy and seeing me being spoken to in this way by an expert, stopped believing that I was a capable mother, human, woman, wife. They just didn't believe in anything I said anymore. And it sounds crazy when I say it out loud, but when you're in the trenches and this is happening to you and DCSF gets involved and a psychiatrist and a suicide and removing aspirins, removing knives and ropes from the house, and you're just in this survival bubble, you can't see clearly what is happening. Only with hindsight can I look back and see how messed up this approach was.
what we try to do is that we try to work with as many family members as we can. And I think Tom Anderson was the one that talked about this first, but who should be talking to whom and when? And so it's up to the client what family members that they want to bring in, not to us. So basically, nothing we do is up to us. It's for the family. And so we ask the family, what are some of the things that would be helpful for us to do? So when we're seeing somebody, we're there for them 24/7 as a team. And no one ever contacts you 24/7 because they know that you're a human being too. But in times of trouble, struggles, confusion, suffering, they reach out to us and we're there for them. You know, after people have their lives the way that they want them to be, it's not the life that they had, because I don't think the life they had was the life they wanted. But after we work with them, they have the life that they want. And the life gets only better and better. And we have such longitudinal research. I believe so much in the social construction of reality that I don't believe that insight therapy really does a whole lot other than provide whatever insight people are creating together at that point in time. So when you go in with an idea is that things are going to be okay, how do we collectively move in a direction that is self-tailored to the people that are in front of us? We intently talk. We genuinely talk. It's not a skill set. It's something that each of us do in a different way. So, but how do we find that genuineness, that if someone is suffering, that we are able to engage in conversations and to hold that suffering instead of needing to do something to make that suffering go away. When you know that it's going to be able to go away, but you do not know how it's going to be, you have to have some kind of faith that things are going to be okay. And I'm not talking now about religiosity, but just having faith in the people that you're seeing, that you believe in the people that you're seeing, that they had their lives together, maybe not the way that they wanted to have it together, because I think most of the time when these symptoms come along, there's been a lot of hardships that have been going on. But we believe they aren't deficient. We believe they have the skills necessary to be able to create self-tailored solutions. You know, if you don't mind, you know, Morales, I found, if I say this, but one of the things I just loved in our conversations that we had together was that one time you were sleeping on, and like, I didn't tell you to do this, but it was such a wonderful, loving idea. And I think there's so much love in these families as well. She was sleeping on a air mattress in front of the door. It's because your daughter, on the medications and such, and not quite being in a space that was a great space, would wander, right? Maybe out the door. And so you slept in front of the door. And
Yes.
when your daughter asked you why, what did you say?
Yes, I remember that. It was really, it was so heartbreaking because when she started realizing and remembering what was going on and what happened, she felt bad, but she would run out to the street and she would get lost. And so several times my husband and I would go out there and frantically looking for her. And it was such a dangerous situation. So the only way that we can control it was taking turns. We bought a blow up mattress and we would put it next to the door. So if she would leave, I would definitely wake up and no, because she would have to go over my body. So, but yes, that was one of the situations that was happening. I was sleeping on the mattress on the floor. But now I look back and and I'm like, wow, I can't believe we went through all of that.
one of the things that I find so much beauty is that when she asked you why you were doing it, you said my back is hurting. So there wasn't any shame, there wasn't deficiency, there wasn't added anxiety to a person that was so anxious because they know things weren't right and they were devastated.
Yes.
And there was belief that she would be fine.
Yes, and I know I will never forget every time we went to the ranch for therapy, you would say, she's going to be fine. She's going to get better. You'll see. You'll see. And those words, I would go back home with her and I'm like, she will get better. She knows what she's saying. And sure enough, the time came when she woke up and we just could not believe it. It was amazing. She loves nature a lot. So that in a way it's still in her that she now likes to talk and we walk on the park. We want to go visit the horses as well. So just let me know when we can go.
And so I think, there was just so many wonderful things that were happening that I don't want to talk about because it's not my story. But little by little, every day, every time. And see, people sometimes come every day, right? So they're coming every day. That doesn't mean they're staying. Some people will stay a long time, and some people don't stay a long time. It's just like Zoom now that we do. Sometimes people will stay for a couple of hours or 3 on a Zoom, and then sometimes it'll be 15 minutes. So there's no strict rules. Everything is according to not what I need, but what somebody else needs.